Your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Point of View Weekend Edition, and we're so grateful you can join us. We're going to be talking about a lot of different topics today. And in studio with me is Jeff McArtor, who, first of all, is the Executive Vice President, Chief Legal Officer for First Liberty Institute. And Jeff, always great to have you here.
Thanks, Corey.
And also Liberty McArtor. Of course, you know her. She was on earlier this week, and she will be on in a couple of programs in the next couple of weeks as well. She's a writer as well as the host of the Know Why podcast. Great to have you here as well.
Thanks, Kerby.
Just before we get into some of the issues in the news, let me welcome some radio stations, and this is the Life Changing Radio Network. These stations cover much of New England. The network has stations in Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. And so as a result, they will be listening to this weekend edition today. And with the addition of these stations, Point of View is now carried on 219 stations in 33 states. So I certainly want to welcome them. And if you're listening to Point of View for the first time, I hope that you will not only take the time to go to our website, pointofview.net, but listen on a regular basis, and we look forward to chatting with you as well. Well, one of the things we like to do on our Friday weekend edition is kind of get a religious liberty update. Earlier in the week, we did chat briefly with Kelly Shackelford, talk about being one of the individuals tapped to the National Religious Liberty Commission. But we also mentioned real quickly, Jeff, but I thought it would be good to have you give us some detail, because you have a federal court ruling in your favor. This goes back to a case out of California in which, if you can believe this, fifth graders were supposed to actually participate in and read gender ideology lessons. And common sense is breaking out even in California, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really an incredible case and an incredible victory for our team, because this is the first time any court, let alone a court in California, but any court has recognized the parental right to receive two things: notification, that when your child is being subjected to something that would violate their religious beliefs, and then secondly, in addition to notification, the right to opt out of any program that violates your family's religious beliefs. So the fact that it was a preliminary injunction that a judge in California was able to see the light. But the case is so, again, it's one of those outrageous cases that I think just common sense just went out the window with the school district, because you've got fifth grader being asked as part of something they called their buddy program to read a book with a kindergartner. And your first thought says, well, that's kind of nice. You have a fifth grader and kindergartners get together. Well, it's okay if you're reading perhaps Dr. Seuss. It's not okay if you're reading a book, My Shadow is Pink, which is encouraging children to have confusion about their gender, and actually participate then in an activity where the children get to decide, well, what color, i.e., what is my gender today?
Yes.
As if your sex is somehow neutral. And look, the good news is that it was so outrageous that even a federal court in California rolled our way. But this really is. We talk about landmark victories, and this is one, because it's the first time that a federal court has recognized the right to notification, the right to opt out for parents.
Liberty, let me come to you, because your kids are a little closer to the ages here.
Mm-hmm.
And just imagine if your older child was encouraged to then hand some chalk to a kindergartner and say, okay, now we're going to have you draw your shadow, whether you want a pink shadow or a blue shadow, whatever it might be. Maybe it would even be a purple one. And again, this is pretty coercive, isn't it?
Oh, it is. And the thing is, my 4-year-old right now really truly believes that he's an astronaut. And, sometimes they believe that they're a dinosaur that day. And so this kind of thing is, it's not age appropriate. It's something that parents should decide how they want to talk about this issue. And I would guess, Jeff, that this is actually something that the majority of parents would support, even if they are more left-leaning. The right of parents to opt their children out of something they don't agree with, or not have this pushed on kids in schools so young. This doesn't seem like it would be very controversial with parents kind of across the political spectrum.
Yeah, you'd be surprised. I mean, it's California, it's San Diego, and no one's done a poll to know. And always the minority is very loud. And so there have been. I mean, this family has been. We're proceeding unanimously. And so you don't know. I mean, it's the initials. The name of the case is S.E. And the reason is that the kid, the fifth grader, has been subject to some harassment. Family has been subject to harassment. But again, I don't think that that's a majority. I really think it's probably a silent majority who would support parents even in California. But there's a segment, unfortunately, of the parents that thinks this is a good idea to subject children to this type of violation of their constitutional rights, as the court found.
Let me just mention that we don't have these articles posted yet, but hopefully will by the end of the program. But you can, of course, go to First Liberty and find a press release for that as well. So that's the first one, and it's a victory. But I thought we would spend just a little bit of time, because we have not really addressed the issue of the mental acuity and health of certainly the former president of the United States, Joe Biden. And Liberty, one of the things that we have seen is that now all sorts of books are coming out saying, oh, if we'd only had some idea. And I love the argument that is being made in our first article, past, of course, the one we just mentioned. And that is, when they're writing about this, they're saying that a lot of cabinet officers stopped seeing the president, but there's a few words missing, and that is so that they could implement the 25th Amendment.
Yeah, I remember when that news first came out last year that it had been over a year since the cabinet had all had a meeting with the president. And you wonder, how could this happen? How could people not within the administration be making more of a deal about it? And it just reminds me of, boiling frogs. You can get so comfortable with the situation, and it gets worse and worse and worse, but you somehow delude yourself into thinking, well, it's still okay, and I'm too scared to say anything about it. And that's the only explanation that I think makes sense for what was happening, is there was this sort of fear around speaking out about it. But I would hope that situation wouldn't be the same if the shoe was on the other foot, because this is the kind of thing people have to be aware and speak out. That should have been a huge red flag.
Jim Garrity put it this way: if you have a sitting president who goes cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, or has some circumstance that makes it impossible for him to adequately perform his duties, the vice president and the president's cabinet are supposed to step in and declare that he can no longer perform the role, and declare the vice president is taking over. That's in the Constitution, in case anybody wondered about that. And Jeff, this was implemented because every once in a while you have a president who goes under surgery. You might remember in the last administration, we didn't really know where the secretary of the military was for a while.
We didn't know where Lloyd Austin was.
Yeah. And so but if that was the president, you would hope that somebody would say, okay, if any decisions need to be made, we'll transfer the authority for a few minutes to the vice president, right?
Right. And then we had the situation with Woodrow Wilson as well.
Yes. And we'll come back and give some history to that, but that's the first issue. By the way, we may open up the phones today, because I suspect you have some comments about that. Let's take a break. We'll be back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
It should come as no surprise that the U.S. faces a housing crisis. Over a year ago, President Biden promised during the State of the Union address to lower housing prices. He blamed rent-gouging landlords and greedy realtors. He promised to build 2 million more homes. In the end, there was a lot of accusing and lots of fiery rhetoric, but little change. Miranda Devine cites a Heritage Foundation study that documents the following. During his presidency, the cost of a median-priced home more than doubled and rents soared to record highs. She explains something I've mentioned in previous commentaries. In many cities, it takes more than the entire median household after-tax income to afford a median-price home. Those with a house don't fare much better. Almost 1/3 of American adults are house poor, meaning they spend more than 30% or more on their income on a place to live. Sadly, the younger generation has all but given up on the American dream of home ownership that their parents and grandparents achieved. Miranda Devine cites some of the reasons for the housing crisis, but I want to mention a major reason not mentioned in her column. The price of housing is going up because the value of the dollar is going down. This relates to my 2 previous commentaries this week about the economy. My house, for example, is supposedly worth twice as much as it was 10 years ago, but it isn't more valuable. It's just that it would take twice as many dollars to buy it because the dollars are worth less each year. To solve the housing crisis, we need to look at such issues as zoning and housing regulations, but the best chance to really solve it is to acknowledge we have a broken economy and broken money. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Inflation, go to viewpoints.info/inflation. That's viewpoints.info/inflation. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. I'd love to get your thoughts about this, because if nothing else, we have seen it for our own eyes, and yet to bring that up was not allowed. Of course, we have in studio with us today Liberty McArtor as well as Jeff Mateer. And Jeff, you were talking about the fact that we have another case, a very significant one that happened at the turn of the last century, in which Woodrow Wilson was so incapacitated that a lot of people argue that his wife basically ran the government.
No, I think history speaks to that, and there have been books written about that. I guess there's going to be books written about the Biden presidency as well, and what happened there. But I think what happens, I think a dynamic happens, that the staff who are Biden people don't want. I mean, they're doing everything they can to preserve. Yes, Biden's power, but it's really the staff's power, because if you read some of the things that are coming out, what they basically would say, you'd have staff, unelected, unconfirmed individuals who are meeting with cabinet officers, senators, representatives, and saying, "Oh yeah, we'll let the president know." Well, okay. Yeah, I mean, sure. Yeah. And here's what the president, and then expressing what the will of the president is, with the president not being in the room. And I don't think the vice president, quite frankly, was in the room either for many of these discussions. But it does come out of that. And I think the 25th Amendment was passed in the 1960s. And I think what part of it was the concern, if with the assassination of President Kennedy, what if President Kennedy had not been killed, but instead had been in some sort of state? Then what happens if that occurs? And so I also think that there's some that I get that this is coming out now, but I wonder if the liberal media isn't really setting the stage for some future, say in the next couple of years during the current presidency of Donald Trump, to kind of lay the groundwork that, he got the 25th Amendment. Isn't he acting really crazy? And so let's, it is interesting. I mean, there was no, we talked, you talked about it on this show. I mean, where is Biden? The points Liberty, that you made, no cabinet meetings. But it is interesting that this, after the fact now is coming out and more information's coming out. Is it really to talk about Joe Biden, or is it to lay the groundwork for something in the future?
Back to what you said, Liberty, just a minute ago in this article, it talks about there were no in-person cabinet meetings from October 2nd, 2023 to September 20th, 2024, almost an entire year. And it's one thing for cabinet officers to always complain they don't get enough face time with the president. It's another thing to not even see the president face to face for nearly a year.
Yeah, quite a different thing. And again, when this news did start to come out and you did see some reporting in the mainstream media, there were all of a sudden a bunch of people saying, I had a strange interaction with the president, or I've been wondering the same thing. And we were all of a sudden all asking, oh, have you noticed this too? But it was like there was some sort of hush over everything until somebody broke the story at a particular time, and then everybody was able to talk about it, and kind of like, wow, we were blindsided. However, it seems like people were aware for a long time.
The question you've got to ask, I think, Jeff, is who was pushing the button for the auto pen? Because one of the individuals you know pretty well is the Speaker of the House. And Mike told us in one particular story of how when he was talking to the president about a particular issue that was affecting even some of the people back in Louisiana, the president said, no, that's not what that is that I signed. Of course, I'm not sure he even signed it. I think they just push a button and the auto pen signed it automatically. And that's when Mike Johnson, for the first time, realized they're not even telling him the truth about the things that he does sign or that the auto pen signs. And it's back to the issue of who really was running the government, some of the staff.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's got to start with the chief of staff, right? I mean, the way the White House is organized, the chief of staff in most White Houses is the person who controls the access to the president, and you can't get to the president without going through the chief of staff. But I think in this case, there are a lot more people part of the conspiracy inside and outside the White House. But yeah, I mean, to think that how close we could be to, I mean, just think about war and the decisions that a president has to make every day, and you have a president who's completely was not there. And of course, we saw, I mean, the debate, we saw glimpses of that. And it's why eventually I think they made that decision to remove him from the ballot. Now, interesting, they removed him from running for president, but they didn't remove him from the White House.
You remember one of these testimony where you had Scott Bassett, who was the Secretary of Treasury, and at one point, one of these rather obnoxious members of Congress, and I repeat myself sometimes, but nevertheless, this particular one made some statement about, well, who was president in 2014 or 2014? And Scott Bassett, to make a joke, said, well, we believe it was Joe Biden. And the man just went nuts over it, but the joke was, I guess he didn't get the joke, we really don't know who was running the presidency at that time. And so, if nothing else, it's just a good illustration of the fact that, and he's going through, who was in president 2014, who was in 2020, and all the, just going through this whole long list. And it was interesting that when, like I said, he came to Biden, of all things, he said, I believe he was just making a joke, but nobody wanted to even acknowledge that as a possibility, even though that was out there. So if nothing else, I did want to give some of you a chance to join our conversation. 1-800-351-1212. First of all, do you think it is only after the fact now that we're hearing about this because the press has to cover themselves? Or, as Jeff pointed out, maybe this is setting it up for the future of coming to the president in some issue and using this to maybe remove Donald Trump in the future. But as this article says, it's one thing if the president's meetings with members of Congress, foreign leaders, or ordinary citizens grow rarer and shorter. That's bad, but it's not a constitutional crisis. But if a president is deliberately avoiding meeting with his cabinet, he's not around the only people who are empowered by the Constitution to recognize the problems in the president's mental capacities and take action, then you can, of course, see that as well. So it does seem to me that it wasn't just an issue of, well, we're just going to try to protect him. We're actually going to keep him away from the people that could implement even the 25th Amendment.
Yeah, it does seem like there was some intentionality behind that. And politics aside, I remember thinking at the time, especially with the incident you mentioned with Mike Johnson, and him confronting the president and the president saying, I didn't sign that. You really at that point are taking advantage of somebody who shouldn't be in that position. And so it was wrong on multiple different levels. So it is something that needs to be confronted now. We don't know why the media is confronting it now, but it needs to be talked about. So hopefully that can be avoided in the future.
I just thought before we take a break, one of the things we've been talking about Liberty this week is the Viewpoints commentary. And I just thought I'd get your comments because anybody listening on the computer right now at a quarter after, they heard my commentary on housing crisis, which we may talk about a little bit later. And in just a few minutes, they'll also have a chance to hear Penna Dexter's on shop class returns. But I'd love to get your thoughts because this week we've been talking about the need for people to subscribe to the Viewpoints commentary.
Yes, this is such a great free resource that you provide, Kerby. So I get the benefit of reading it twice. I get to proofread it because I'm on staff. And so, but I also personally subscribe in my personal email. And I can't tell you the amount of tabs I have open on my computer because you'll recommend a book or something. And I'm like, oh, yes, I'm going to add that to my reading list. But it's just such a quick, accessible way to really get informed about an issue. And so I learn a lot just by reading it and subscribing. I recommend them and share them. And it's something that people can go and subscribe to right on the website at pointofview.net.
Let me just encourage you to go to the website right now. You're going to find some of the articles. We've already talked about the federal court decision, or at least the injunction about gender ideology lessons. We will, when we come back, talk about a couple of other issues here as well, Joe Biden and the 25th Amendment, but also one that I certainly want to go around the round table, which sort of relates to this issue of religious liberty, but also pro-life, and that has to do with the fact that there has been a push to force individuals who have pro-life convictions to actually participate in abortions, and so we're going to talk about that and see what we can do to address that issue. Once we get into that, we'll also talk about the high cost of drugs and a variety of other topics. And if you find yourself wanting to look at the articles that we're going to be quoting from, you can go to the website pointofview.net. As you go there, you'll see the Viewpoints commentary, but also there is a button there for you to subscribe to the Viewpoints commentary, which again come out Monday through Friday. Mine lands in your inbox Monday through Friday. Penna Dexter's, which you'll hear in about 15 minutes, actually will land in your inbox on Saturday. Let's take a break, though. We'll come back with more right after this.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you. Now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give it 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, the number is 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. Jeff Mateer, Liberty McArtor with us. Let's go out to California, KNLB. Kathy, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yes. What people don't realize, too, and this has been going on for a long time, I believe, because you had this whole thing with Feinstein in California, and she supposedly, I came across that Nancy Pelosi's daughter was living with her, but then during the time of COVID and all of those kind of things, they were doing proxy voting, but then you go back to Elisha Cummings, and nobody had a clue how sick he was. And it's just like the Democratic Party, the younger party, and the older party, they're just running amok. And I know the Democrats would say that, you know, they write the laws. So it was like they knew it, and they figured they could just get away with it.
Wow.
Because,
auto pen, proxy voting. I mean, do we even have a representative form of government anymore? I mean, you begin to wonder.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think proxy voting, I think, violates the Constitution as well. And I know they did it during COVID, but there's no reason to have proxy voting. I think members have to be there. You can't have others vote for you. Somebody you didn't mention, of course, is that's now of the left is talking about is the senator from Pennsylvania, John Fetterman. And
yes.
The reason they're upset now is he's not going with them on every vote. All of a sudden, he's acting strange.
Oh, yes.
I think he's always been wearing those hoodies that he wears. But and so I do think it is a Democrat problem that they've created. But gosh, no. I mean, proxy voting. I mean, the whole concept. I mean, it just, you need to be there in person. That's part of being a representative. You can't be, wherever you are. And in some cases, I guess they were actually in hospitals. But that's the whole point. You think about there are stories about the founding, about people having to come back and make it and wait. And I mean, that's the whole point. Right. You've got to be there in person.
Yes. And again, I know that you've studied government and history, Liberty, and it does seem to me that we just have had so many stories over the years during the 18th century and the 19th century and others in which sometimes there would be attempts to ride back in thunderstorms and everything so that I could be present to vote. And now to just say, well, because we've got electronics, we can just proxy vote. Yeah, but we don't know who's pushing the button, do we?
No, we don't, especially not now. And I know we'll talk more about technology, I think, later in the program. But this is so important, and I think it's another example of how our government representatives, unfortunately, can be very corrupt. We're learning a lot about just how much money, the amount of members in Congress who are millionaires and things like that. And so no wonder they don't want to have any limits to their service, because they want to stay in office as long as possible. And you have to ask yourself, are you still serving the interest of your constituents? Do you even remember where you came from and who elected you? And does it even count? Are you truly serving the people anymore if you're not even there to vote and maybe don't even know what you're voting for? So this is, I think, just another example of corruption and why the founders were so wise to institute checks and balances and limits for those who are in power.
Again, we have also wondered if some of them just fallen asleep. Have you seen some of those pictures?
Oh, yeah, just this week. I can't remember who it was, but
there's 3 different
in a
individuals.
Hearing, yes, just completely asleep, which I understand. I'm sure I'd get sleepy too, but you can't do that.
Well, and one was an actual vote where a member of Congress, and fortunately somebody didn't reach over and push his button. They woke him up so that he could push his button. But, I mean, there is a sense in which you've just got to have some really important issues right there. But let me take another phone call because some people want to weigh in with their comments. And I think, Bonnie, you want to talk about how Donald Trump hit the ground running. So go ahead.
Yes, I was probably, like many of us that are listening today, completely disappointed and distraught when he didn't win 4 years ago. But now looking back or looking at what they're suddenly exposing, like, oh, yeah, we're worried about Joe Biden. It's like, we all saw that. I listened to Point of View. I'm a Air Team member.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure.
Sure.
Is that what it is? Air Team on this?
Yeah, Truth Team member.
Yes. For a while now. And so I've been in on the truth, and I've been watching it from the outside looking in because I'm disabled now from a car accident and all this stuff that they're exposing. I'm just smiling thinking, praise God that Donald Trump did not get elected in 2020 because he's had 4 years to find out who all the bad actors are, how all the back stuff is running, who was against him in the first place. So now what we're seeing is all of his homework coming to fruition. And this is just the beginning, but praise God, can you imagine if he would have gotten 2 terms in a row, America would be beyond lost. I mean, God had mercy on our nation to allow him 4 years off.
I think we got to see also what DEI was going to look like and what wokeism was going to look like and everything. And Jeff, I'd love to get your thoughts because here is an individual that goes over to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, encouraging the Saudis maybe to join the Abraham Accords. There's a piece which I heard the other day where he landed, at the military base, and the general said, "Well, now would you like a nap?" And he says, "I'm not Joe Biden. No, I'm ready to go. I've got questions for these guys right now," and jumps right into it. And just the amount of enthusiasm and also just the wisdom of trying to figure out where the problems were in terms of the deep state. And in some respects, he's really hit the ground running those first 100+ days.
I mean, I think what Donald Trump does is he so often says the things that people want to say, but I don't know if it don't have the courage or just, they just don't think it's polite or have been told you can't say those things. And his directness. I mean, I think his whole trip to the Middle East has been one. I think he's not saying anything that you haven't heard before, but we've never had a president say those things to the people in the room. And look, you've got to get through it. I mean, you've got to get through things like, I mean, he'll talk about. He wants to talk about Joe Biden. He wants to talk about the stolen election, and then he gets through that, and then he actually says some things that are really important. I mean, if you were scripting him, there's some things you wouldn't have him say, but you know what? He just says some things that are just just remarkable. And I know you had Kelly on earlier in the week about. I mean, just think about this Religious Liberty Commission. I mean, no president has ever done that.
Yeah.
And just to bring up and put the focus on religious liberty like it's never been before, and to empower a commission. And we're now at the office, we call Kelly Commissioner. So if you see him, Kerby, okay. when he's on Friday, please refer to him as Commissioner Shackelford, which is his new title. But I mean, that's the type of stuff. And so, yes, you get.
I'm going to have some fun with that one.
You get some of that. Yeah, Kelly doesn't like it, by the way, just to kind of warn you. But that's why we should need to say it more and more.
Yeah, that's all the more reason.
Commissioner Shackelford. Commissioner Shackelford. But, I mean, that's what you get with Donald Trump. I mean, with everything else, the whirlwind that he brings, you get some very direct, frank statements like he's done in Riyadh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, just thinking about younger Americans who definitely lean left, but at the same time, I think that there has been generations raised with a distrust of institutions and distrust of government and, authority figures and representatives, because you wonder, can I really trust what you're saying? Are you going to follow through? And so I think Jeff is right. People were attracted or intrigued by Trump just often saying things that nobody else would say, or saying things in a different manner. And so he's definitely doing a lot, that's for sure. It's a lot to keep up with. Plenty of news to talk about, as always, Kerby.
I would say so. Just even yesterday, oral arguments on birthright citizenship, which I don't know that's going to go anywhere, but also the whole question about tariffs and strategic Bitcoin reserve. And as you said, a National Religious Liberty Commission really trying to expand the number of countries that will be part of the Abraham Accords. First president in 25 5 years to meet with the president or the dictator or the leader, whatever name you want to use, of Syria, and a number of other things. Matter of fact, one of our articles, which we may get to, by John Zmirak, who's been on the program with us before, 2 presidential speeches comparing George W. Bush and Donald Trump. There's a little bit of overlap. Remember those Venn diagrams, but not a lot. And I think it's a good illustration of exactly what Jeff was saying. Let's take a break, though, because a lot of people were concerned that when you put in charge of the Department of Health and Human Services Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's hardly pro-life, what would that mean? But I think you'll find that this next article, written by our good friend Jordan Sekulow, I think is maybe some encouragement, and it brings together both issues related to abortion and religious liberties. We'll talk about that right after this.
Amidst a push to bring manufacturing back to our shores, many communities are bringing shop classes back to their high schools. According to the Wall Street Journal, as baby boomers retire, companies are looking for workers in the skilled trades, but there simply aren't enough young adults trained in plumbing, electrical work, and welding. Some businesses are beginning to look at high school students, and not just as future hires. Some companies want them now, or at least soon. School districts are getting on board by resuscitating the shop class and giving manufacturers tables at their job fairs. In some cases, businesses are teaming up with high schools to enable students to work part-time, earning money as well as academic credit. Employers told the Journal this is a strategy that is likely to become more crucial in the coming years. Most industries are tech-infused and seek younger workers who are comfortable programming and running computer diagnostics. They need tech-savvy workers to run advanced equipment. According to the Journal's report, the smartest employers get a foot into high schools early. They're attracting high school students by running summer camps to expose them to careers in the trades. They're offering internships and shadowing opportunities at workplaces and are sometimes even dropping by to meet students at school and see them in action. One welding instructor told the Journal employers regularly visit his classroom, bringing branded swag and offering students jobs when they graduate. For many reasons, college is no longer a given, even for the smart kids. In fact, smart kids everywhere are rejecting the colleges for all mindset. Smart parents are considering the cost, especially when their students don't have career goals that require college degrees. They're advising caution about student debt. Some smart kids are foregoing the student debt for financial freedom by starting well-paid, skilled trade jobs right out of high school. Shop class isn't for everyone, but neither is college. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Let's talk about the next issue. This is by Jordan Sekulow. Is RFK Jr. showing his pro-life chops? Because the Department of Health and Human Services has launched an investigation into a hospital. First of all, let me commend to you some of the resources we have. If you work at a pregnancy resource center or you're just concerned about this issue of abortion, Liberty's with us today, and this is her one on a biblical point of view on chemical abortion. We had one earlier, but this is the newest one, which just came out and really focuses on some of the new material. So it's the April edition, and I would highly recommend that. Here's one that came out many years ago that I put out in 2020 just on maybe how to talk to people about abortion, but that's an important issue. And really what we're talking about here, liberty, are two issues. First, the religious liberty aspect of that, but more importantly, can we and should we ever allow a hospital to force individuals who are Christians, who are pro-life, to actually perform an abortion? And this is a place where I think we would get a broader consensus. Even if you saw yourself as pro-choice, I think you would recognize that this was very heavy-handed to force individuals, in particular ultrasound technicians in New Mexico, to compel them to actually perform an abortion.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I was looking up just a few minutes ago, and polls do show that the majority of Americans support conscience protections for healthcare workers, because you shouldn't be forced to be involved in any procedure that goes against your convictions, and especially your religious convictions. And again, obviously, I'm pro-life. I don't think you should have the choice to kill an unborn child. But even if you want to say you're pro-choice, this isn't pro-choice to say that you have to participate in this procedure. And so I'm really glad to see the administration supporting that. I was one of the ones concerned, and as I voiced, I think on this program too, leading up to the election, is this going to be a pro-life administration? And so seeing things like this, where they're looking into this and they are supporting religious liberty protections for healthcare workers, is encouraging. Next, I really hope that Kennedy follows through on getting a new study going on chemical abortion and the abortion pill. He said that he's interested in that, and Trump has said that he's okay with that, and I'd love to see that in the Trump administration.
Yeah, I'm even seeing some secular writers saying, if this were not abortion, we would a long time ago called for an investigation about chemical abortion and the drugs that are being used. And so I think, again, one of the reasons why I would encourage you to get this booklet, and again, if you are not already on the Truth Team, and we were just talking a minute ago with Bonnie, who's part of the Truth Team, we'd be glad to send this to you anyway. But it's certainly one of the benefits of being on the Truth Team is we're sending these out every month. The most recent one coming out soon is on Buddhism. One was before on Hinduism, and got all sorts of very important articles. But let me now, Jeff, come to you, because there's another issue, and that is, as you like to say, there's a new sheriff in town, and all of a sudden, when a hospital is forcing individuals to do something that violates their conscience, their deeply held convictions, it seems to me that this is also a victory for religious liberty.
I mean, it's a huge victory. And then to have the Trump administration sort of putting it to the hospitals who engaged in this behavior, I mean, it's going to send a message that, hey, you better respect religious liberty rights. I mean, we've had, I think in the last 4 years, we've had at least 3 cases where we've represented individuals who were employed and their employers were asking them to participate in the abortion process. We had a case just a couple years ago, Stephanie Carter down in Waco, at a VA hospital, because the VA was claiming it didn't need to follow Texas law, which prohibits abortions, that you could go to the VA and have an abortion. And Stephanie Carter was threatened with, a nurse there was threatened with, you've got to participate in it. And we represented her. Now, that wouldn't happen today because there is a new sheriff at the VA. Doug Collins is not going to, Secretary Collins is not going to let that happen. But it was an example. And then we've had a series of a couple cases against the pharmacy company CVS, who were requiring their employees no exemptions, even though in the past they had, much like this hospital in New Mexico. In the past, they were giving religious exemption. You didn't have to participate. And then CVS had the policy, reversed that policy, and subjected our clients to losing their jobs or participate in something they religiously believe. So the fact that the federal government is weighing in, the positive is just we do at First Liberty in July, we'll release the next yearly index of religious liberty in the states, and sort of just a I met with the people, and I can't tell you who's number one, but I can say this because it goes to this in a point that Liberty made. More and more states are adopting conscience protections.
Right. Yes, they are.
And one of the reasons states are moving up in our index and the states that are now in the top 5 are because their legislatures have adopted conscience protections for healthcare workers specifically. And so that's encouraging. Now, not enough states have done it. But we're hoping that we'll be able to take this and say, hey, if you're Texas, you want to move up, well, guess what? Here's some legislation you can pass. If you're West Virginia and want to move up or wherever, even in red states who don't have these conscience protections, we think it's important that they're passed.
Yeah, that is so critical, so crucial. And again, I love the work that First Liberty is doing just to educate people on this and release, the index every year. Because so much of this is just common sense. And people hear that and they say, well, I wouldn't want to force somebody to do something that they don't agree with or that's against their conscience. I might want the freedom to do it, but I don't want to force somebody else to do it. And we talk about the polarization a lot in America, but there's actually places where you can find common ground. And I will say that I think one area that the Trump administration is doing well is kind of tapping into some of those areas where there is common ground and trying to make progress in those areas like this one.
Yes.
And Kerby, it ties right into our Groff case, the case we won at the Supreme Court, even though Groff had to do. So you had Gerald Groff, who by the way, it's now public. Remember, we won at the Supreme Court, but what we won was his right to have his case heard. Well, the case was heard, and then we were ordered to mediation. And Gerald accepted a settlement, the federal government paying $1 million. So a $1 million settlement for Gerald Groff. That's what happens when you violate someone's statutory and constitutional religious liberty rights.
Wow.
But that Groff case says, and the post office made this in, because you'll hear sometimes saying, well, we can't let employees out because it's going to burden us. Almost in every one of these cases, there are other people willing to participate. You're really just putting the hammer down on employees and causing them to violate their conscience. And so what Groff says is if that were a real burden, not a made-up burden, then we have something to talk about. But in so many of these cases, and like this case that ACLJ represented these folks against the hospital in New Mexico, our case against CVS, our case against the VA, there are plenty of people employed who are willing to engage in this behavior. Let these people alone. Let them live out their beliefs.
One last thing I thought I might just mention, there is a place where you have the now Secretary of Health and Human Services, RFK Jr., saying, I agree with President Trump that every abortion is a tragedy. I serve at the pleasure of the president. I'm going to implement his policies. One of the things that you do so often, Liberty, is put together the Pray for America. I think we should pray for the Secretary of Health and Human Services, that he would switch from his kind of pro-choice sort of into really understanding as he interacts with a lot of people that are pro-life in the Department of Health and Human Services, that he comes to that conclusion. So just another benefit that you receive if, of course, you connected with us. And again, you can sign up for the very important Pray for America, and that's on the website. We'll be back with more right after this.
Have you subscribed to the Viewpoints commentary? No? Well, you're missing out on an essential free resource straight from Point of View's Kerby Anderson. Viewpoints are Kerby's free daily email commentaries covering any and every issue relevant to your faith, your family, and your freedom. And what makes Viewpoints essential is how packed they are with information you will not get anywhere else, while also being a quick read. In 2 minutes or less, you can become better educated about an important issue affecting America. And Viewpoints is easily shareable, making it a great resource to forward to your friends or also to post on social media. Don't miss out on this essential free resource from Kerby Anderson and Point of View. Join the thousands of Americans who receive Viewpoints by enrolling today. Do it right now at pointofview.net pointofview.net/enroll. Again, it's free and it takes just a moment. pointofview.net/enroll. Point of View will continue after this.
I just wanted to tell you, too, how much I have appreciated Point of View over the years. I've always been taught that we take care of our own, and I feel like Point of View is one of our own because of the Christian worldview that you do promote. And so I have become a partner today, and I just want to thank you so much, and just God bless you for all that you do.
Listen, I wanted to make a quick comment. I'm a relatively new listener to the show, and I really kind of stumbled upon it more than anything because I'm doing some driving now that I wasn't in the past. And my comment really is, I think you guys and gals are more right on about the assessment of this country right now than anything I've heard. You know, I go home and I tell my wife, you've got to hear what they're talking about on the show. It's just so right on. And I tell my parents the same thing.
I'm 25 years old, and I started listening to Point of View about 4 years ago, and it has changed the way that I think and the way that I view the world around me.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We are privileged to have in studio with us still Liberty McArtor as well as Jeff Mateer. And Liberty, I thought we'd come and talk in just a minute about the high price of drugs, which is our next article. But then we're going to get into some of the things that are happening in the Middle East. Don't want to overdo that, but a speech by the president and some very significant deals. If there's one thing this president is, he's a deal maker. And so we'll talk about that. Also, do want to talk about artificial intelligence, because you've been talking about that certainly in the Know Why podcast, and we have an article about that, as well as, of course, we'll get to Penna Dexter's piece before we're all through on shop classes. But I haven't forgotten the fact that Jeff would also like to talk about Pete Rose, and we've got to talk baseball a little bit. We're in the midst of baseball season, and that's the case. But let me come to that. And we talked about this the other day, Liberty, but it's worth mentioning that the issue of drug prices is significant. And it was interesting, since we were just mentioning the Secretary of Health and Human Services, that absolutely there has been some comments by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. that he really never believed that a Republican would try to do something to bring down prescription drugs, because oftentimes Democrats promise to do it and never do that. And even said the other day when he was talking that a number of my kids, really kind of left of center, they're Bernie Sanders supporters, but when I told them that the president was going to bring down the price of drugs through these different actions, they got tears in their eyes. And so, just to use one quote from Cal Thomas, drug prices in America are nearly 3 times the price of drugs in 33 comparable countries, according to a report from the Department of Health and Human Services. Now, that puts you front and center against Big Pharma, but it does look like that might happen.
I hope so. I know I don't want to take good health for granted, and I've seen so many acquaintances and friends and members of my church have to go through health crises, and often it's the church family or the community pulling together to help them afford treatment, and it's very expensive. And so again, we were talking before the break about areas where we can find common ground, and I think this is a big one. And I noticed in the article that Bernie Sanders had said, he supports this, make it a congressional bill, not an executive order. But I don't know of an American outside of Big Pharma who wouldn't want to see progress on this issue. And this is part of making America healthy again. Well,
it's the politicians who receive money from Big Pharma. I mean, they have such a huge lobbying effort, and that's what's wrong. And so this is one of those things that Joe Biden didn't do, Obama didn't do, Bill Clinton didn't do. It took Donald Trump to do something like this. And, this is an issue. It always, the fact that you could go to Mexico and get a drug and it would be substantially less than you can get in the United States. And what's the explanation for that? Well, the explanation that the pharma companies say are, it's because of R&D. Well, all that means is Americans pay for the R&D for the rest of the world. And that's just not right. It's not fair. And Big Pharma so I think the result should be American prices should and will go down, and prices across the world will go up. But doesn't that make sense that if you take a pill and it costs X amount to make, it should cost the same everywhere. So another one to give President Trump credit for. I'm always a little cautious when I hear I'm on the same side as Bernie Sanders. But because you got to think, am I right? Now, where's Elizabeth Warren on this issue? Because and I think it's one of those weird ones where you get the far left of the Democratic Party. And then you have Republicans who are doing some common sense things.
Yeah. Well, Bernie Sanders says, I agree with President Trump. It is an outrage the American people pay for far higher prices in the world for prescription drugs. Now, if Trump is serious, that's the next point, about making real change rather than issuing a press release, he will support legislation I'll be introducing. But again, he wants to come up with some of the socialist ideas. But here's the argument. And that is, if you just made, as he was arguing, that the United States has kind of most favored nation status like others do, then it would only require the price to go up some in these other countries. And that's where Robert F. Kennedy Jr. the other day said, if you just had the prices go up just 20% in Europe, that would generate, and he went into the amounts, which were more than $1 trillion of R&D, research and development. And so you're not talking about a lot, because you're now, instead of just having 95% of it being done through the United States government, according to, of course, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., spreading it out among those other 33 comparable countries, each one gets a little bit of the bite at the apple. You still can eat the whole apple rather than having Americans have to eat almost all the apple. And that's the idea. And so I don't think it's going to be terrible for other countries. And again, back to something else you said, again, Robert F. Kennedy says there are actually more lobbyists for Big Pharma than there are members of Congress.
Yeah.
And that they spend more money on lobbying, and the number two is really far down the list. So again, people have no idea how influential Big Pharma has become.
You know who they also lobby? In addition to Congress, they lobby physicians.
Yes.
And so I think the other issue, and I hope Secretary Kennedy, that this is on the radar screen, and I suspect it is, and I suspect it's on Trump's radar screen because of his pick for Surgeon General, Dr. Casey Means.
Yes.
And it's the over-medication, and she makes this point in her book, the over-medication of Americans. And the reason we're over-medicated is because, again, Big Pharma, right. I sound like I'm Big Pharma, but Big Pharma is not only lobbying Congress, it's lobbying physicians to have them prescribe medications that in many cases, not all, but in many cases aren't warranted.
Yes.
Yeah.
While we're talking about drugs, if I can promote one other thing, since we have been talking about the idea of viewpoints, my May 13th viewpoint commentary, because you know where I'm going with this, was on China's chokehold on medicine. And again, Liberty, we've talked about this before. Remember during the pandemic, again, you and I maybe weren't taking those drugs, but there were a lot of people that we knew that were dependent on certain pharmaceuticals. And when we closed down China and we closed down America, we began to realize that, can you believe this? The United States relies on China for 95% of the key ingredients that go into at least the generic drugs, and we need to turn that around.
Yeah, that should alarm us, because if we are dependent, and that could end at any time. And so, yeah, that was a huge wake-up call, definitely.
Yes. Well, again, I just never miss an opportunity to talk about the Viewpoints commentary because, again, we've been promoting that. But we come back from the break. The president's gone overseas. He wants to get Saudi Arabia to join the Abraham Accords. He's really recognizing that we're not necessarily going to be able to change everybody's attitude. We're not going to make all of these Middle Eastern countries into constitutional republics. But let's, if we can, at least get them to make a deal and try not to kill us. And maybe that's a win. And so we'll talk about some of the things that he's been trying to accomplish over in the Middle East. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
It should come as no surprise that the U.S. faces a housing crisis. Over a year ago, President Biden promised during the State of the Union address to lower housing prices. He blamed rent-gouging landlords and greedy realtors. He promised to build 2 million more homes. In the end, there was a lot of accusing and lots of fiery rhetoric, but little change. Miranda Devine cites a Heritage Foundation study that documents the following. During his presidency, the cost of a median-priced home more than doubled and rents soared to record highs. She explains something I've mentioned in previous commentaries. In many cities, it takes more than the entire median household after-tax income to afford a median-price home. Those with a house don't fare much better. Almost one-third of American adults are house poor, meaning they spend more than 30% or more on their income on a place to live. Sadly, the younger generation has all but given up on the American dream of home ownership that their parents and grandparents achieved. Miranda Devine cites some of the reasons for the housing crisis, but I want to mention a major reason not mentioned in her column. The price of housing is going up because the value of the dollar is going down. This relates to my 2 previous commentaries this week about the economy. My house, for example, is supposedly worth twice as much as it was 10 years ago, but it isn't more valuable. It's just that it would take twice as many dollars to buy it because the dollars are worth less each year. To solve the housing crisis, we need to look at such issues as zoning and housing regulations, but the best chance to really solve it is to acknowledge we have a broken economy and broken money. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Inflation, go to viewpoints.info/inflation. That's viewpoints.info/inflation. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, I just wanted to spend just a little bit of time talking about the Middle East for a couple reasons. Those of you that actually receive the Outlook magazine, I'll give you a preview. I've written one on foreign policy and the new axis of evil. And Liberty, I forget what yours is, but maybe you'll remember. Tariffs. There we go. There we go. So you can be looking for that in the future. But when we see what is going on right now in the Middle East, it's very interesting. But I think Larry Kudlow, gosh, it's been decades since we've had him on, had a great line. Democrats are digging their own political graves, and Trump is selling them the shovel. And he talks about the fact that right now Democrats find themselves defending criminal gang members, terrorists from Tren de Aragua, which are MS-13. Also, the other day, we had a couple of Democrats decided to actually try to break into an ICE facility in Newark, New Jersey. These are not winning issues. Well, meanwhile, Donald Trump's over in the Middle East, and they're trying to badmouth that. But again, in his speech in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, Donald Trump said, "Before our eyes, a new generation of leaders is transcending the ancient conflicts and tired divisions of the past and forging a future where the Middle East is defined by commerce, not chaos." Now, I don't want to overplay that, but again, one of the problems that even the mullahs are facing in Iran is that this younger generation, and a disproportionate number of people in Iran are younger, they have access to cell phones, they have access to the internet, and they recognize what kind of world that they're in. And individuals that find themselves in Iraq and Iran and Saudi Arabia and Qatar and all sorts of places saying, maybe we'd rather just be able to participate. And the consummate deal maker, President of the United States, is saying, can we just make some deals? Let's stop killing each other. Let's make some deals. Let's engage in trade. And I'm not going to be like George W. Bush. That gets into an article we'll talk about in just a minute, to try to turn your monarchy or your particular jihadist group into a constitutional republic. But maybe we can at least agree to treat each other nicely, not kill each other, and work out deals.
Well, that would be a starting point for sure. And again, I hope that this next generation is listening, because as we will get into, I'm sure, over the next few minutes, if you really want change in a culture, it has to come from within the culture. It can't be forced from the outside. So Trump said a lot of things that sound really good, and hopefully that does inspire from the inside and motivate maybe the next generation to pursue some policies that would be in partnership with the United States and also benefit their own nations.
Yeah, I'm reminded of when I was reading this article, because I hadn't seen it before you sent it, Kerby. I was reminded of, and this is going to be a weird connection, but Bible translation.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
and
I knew where you're going with that.
The old style used to be you would, an American or an English, person from either the UK or from America would basically go in the country and embed themselves, and that person would do all the work.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a switch at some point, and I don't know my Bible translation history, but maybe the 90s. It's not that long ago. For us, it's not that long ago. For Liberty, it's before she was born.
I remember the 90s. Okay.
Before she was born. But there was a switch where they said, no, what we're going to do is we're actually going to train people in the country.
Right.
And we're going to work with the churches in the country to actually do the work, because they actually grew up there. They understand it, and they're going to be more effective in taking the translation, getting the Bibles out and things. And I thought, when I was reading this, I thought, well, that's really what what they're doing, the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
Is instead of us embedding people in and doing things that actually we're going to just support them and allow the people, as Liberty said, the people in the country rise together and bring. So I thought that's interesting, and it's also that we're Americans, we know best, and sort of the ugly American, and
doesn't help.
And no, not at all. Now that doesn't mean we don't support and we don't train the trainers, so to speak, the way they do in Bible translation.
Yeah. And again, indigenous missionary activity, in this case, indigenous individuals that maybe understand what needs to happen in order to change the foundation of the culture in such a way, because the biggest problem, as we've pointed out before, is it's really hard to grow a democracy, much less a constitutional republic, on Muslim soil, because if you start with the assumption that men have more rights than women, which is basically a teaching in the Quran, or that Muslims have more rights than non-Muslims, which again you can really discern from the Quran, you've got some difficulties, but maybe you can get to the point where it is at least a little bit more civil, and you recognize a good example is Turkey is a Muslim country, but it's also a member of NATO, and as a member, isn't it, of the European Union, but if not, it certainly is one that's a little bit more open-minded to that. So that's one of the things he talked about, but in the midst of that, he also recognized, it gets back to the axis of evil, because he said Iran will not get a nuclear weapon. And one of the things that we have in this upcoming Outlook magazine is that, of course, Iran wants nuclear weapons, and we will not let them have it, because, first of all, it would allow Iran to project power in that region. And if you want to understand what that's like, just look at South Korea. We don't do some things against South Korea that we would if they didn't have a nuclear weapon. Number two, it's at least a possibility that a nuclear weapon could be used, not maybe against the United States on our land, but instead launched into the air, and then you get an electromagnetic pulse, which would then destroy all these electronic equipment that we have around us right now, and that would knock us back to almost the Stone Age. Or just the third issue is a lot of people say, well, yes, but Pakistan has a nuclear weapon, and that was one we tried to avoid recently between Iran and Pakistan. But the difference is in Iran, you have some of these individuals that are part of what are called Shia Islam 12ers, and that is they believe that there was an imam, was one of the 12th imam, who is going to come back and protect them if indeed there is any kind of conflict, even a nuclear conflict. So now, for the too old of us that remember mutually assured destruction, the argument was the Soviet Union would not launch nuclear weapons against us because they knew we would launch them against them. But if you are in Iran and have this rather bizarre belief that there will be someone who protects you from nuclear weapons, the issue of deterrence goes out the window, and that's why a nuclear Iran is dangerous not only to Israel but to the United States.
Absolutely. And I think, that it's interesting. Trump's speech, on the one hand, he talked about Syria and the U.S. lifting sanctions. He gets a standing ovation. How often does that happen for an American president in the Middle East? But at the same time, he was very forceful with his remarks about Iran, and again, trying to talk around the leadership there. I mean, the people of Iran, we love and support. This leadership, they cannot have a nuclear weapon.
So again, that's kind of where we are on that. One more piece I thought I'd mention. We have this piece by John Smirek. America First is more Christian than global jihad for democracy. And what he's doing is comparing a speech from George W. Bush. And again, I appreciated the speech because he said it was grand, it was high-minded, and it's the idea that if nothing else, we want to appeal to the hope and dreams of individuals that really long for peace and even long for freedom, and talks about the fire in the mind, which is actually hearkening back to another reference there as well. But again, what we found is that some people in the Middle East don't really want freedom. They are quite content sometimes, as hard as it is to believe, to just live under a ruler, under a dictator, under a monarch, whatever it might be. And so as good as the wordsmithing was, it didn't really register. And even though, interestingly enough, George W. Bush, and we can remember back when he first ran, was not into nation building, as soon as 9/11 came and as soon as we first went into Afghanistan and then into Iraq, we sort of were into nation building, and it's just hard to build anything like a democracy in the Middle East. Whereas Trump says, look, I'm not even going to try, but instead, I'm not going to talk about the fire in the mind. I'm going to talk about something else, and that is it in your best interest to cut a deal with us? And that's kind of the deal making in him, the art of the deal. And that's one of the reasons why he's coming back. What do they talk about now with almost $4 trillion worth of deals out of the Middle East?
Yeah, it was a big number. And, I think he's making a lot of good points. And so hopefully it bears fruit.
Yeah, well, we're going to take a break and just thought we'd cover that briefly. When we come back, artificial intelligence, well, we got to get to Pete Rose, talk about baseball a little bit, and, of course, also a couple of other issues, because Penna Dexter's talking about maybe we're going to bring some shop classes back. And just more recently, you might have seen in Outlook magazine about the whole issue of jobs and the need for, especially if we're going to bring jobs back to the United States, we need to have young people fill those jobs. We'll talk about all that right after this.
The Bible tells us not to worry, and yet there is a lot of worrying stuff in our world today. Thankfully, the Bible doesn't stop at telling us not to worry. God gives us a next step. He says we need to pray. But sometimes even knowing what to pray can be difficult, and that is why Point of View has relaunched our Pray for America movement, a series of weekly emails to guide you in prayer for our nation. Each week you'll receive a brief update about a current issue affecting Americans, along with a written prayer that you can easily share with others. We'll also include a short free resource for you in each email so you can learn more about the issue at hand. Will you commit to pray for America? Go to pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner at the top of the page to subscribe. Again, that's pointofview.net, click on the Pray for America banner. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in America. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour today. We're going to spend some time again talking with Jeff Matera and Liberty McArtor. And our topic, and to hold this up, is artificial intelligence. This is actually a booklet that we produced 2 years ago. And as you can imagine, it's already out of date. But this article, I think, would be very helpful to you because, first of all, it talks about the danger of outsourcing our brains. Artificial intelligence is here, and it's illustrated by the fact both Liberty and I write. And if you have a newer version of a computer and of, say, Microsoft Word, you have this thing called Copilot. And every time Copilot comes up and wants to know if I want you to get out of the way because I want to write this. But the bottom line is whether you have Copilot or ChatGPT or a variety of other things, and I know some of you think I'm speaking in tongues, but nevertheless, these are all the various kinds of apps that are out there. But we very quickly, and that's why I think I'm going to update this very quickly, are going to be in the danger of not necessarily having the robots take over in something that looks like a Terminator, but where the ChatGPT and the artificial various intelligence apps begin to do our work for us, and we get even lazier. And I was unaware of the fact that you can even, as it talks about here, Liberty, actually have the artificial manager become a social media manager and do the posts and everything. So now we have the possibility of one AI talking to another AI on social media, and my mind is just about ready to explode. Your thoughts?
Oh, man. I would encourage people to go to knowwhypodcast.com or look up Know Why Podcast on YouTube because we're actually in a series right now on AI. And I've talked with some great experts in this area. But you're right. It's not necessarily a forceful takeover from robots. We're just giving the technology the power because, and again, we don't want to be Luddites. There may be place for, this technology in certain areas, like maybe the medical field. But more and more people, if you look up what it's used for most commonly, it's actually talking to AI in place of a friend because, and I've read multiple instances of this, people say, I don't want to bother my friends with talking about something that maybe they'll think is boring, so I'll just talk to AI about it. And you have this wave of companionship AI.
That's just amazing.
Talking to AI for therapy, using it to do college assignments. And then, in fact, I saw the article that you sent out yesterday, and then this morning on Facebook, I saw someone say that a college professor had called a student out because they were able to detect that they had used AI to cheat and write their paper for them. Mm-hmm. And then the student sent an email written by ChatGPT to apologize. And so it's really, I think the core issue is that we are farming out our brains to a computer. Even people use it to even write their grocery list. They just, we're not used to sitting down and thinking anymore. And it's also a fundamental breakdown of human relationships and normal interactions that we should have. And we're already too isolated. So I could go on about that. But again, go to Know Why Podcast because we're talking about it every week right now because it's so important.
Well, again, we'll get a link to Know Why Podcast up there, and you can find that pretty easily. But your point about Luddites, that goes back to Ned Ludd, the Luddites, and those were against the textile people. And that was the argument that, well, if we allow these textile machines to actually then do the weaving, then people will lose their jobs. What we found is actually technology gave people a better life and a safer life. And so that is certainly the case. But we've up until now usually had people react against whether or not robots would build your car. And when I say robots, sometimes they don't have a head or anything, but they will actually do the welding and everything else. And up until now, it's always been, well, I'm really sorry that this technological development will get rid of individuals that are blue-collar workers. But now with artificial intelligence, will it get rid of white-collar workers? And when, let's use the lawyer example, when in some respects the various artificial intelligence programs can write a brief, evaluate, write contracts and all the rest, there are some individuals that are saying that might even affect the legal profession.
I know very much. And there have been, just in the last several weeks, there have been examples where judges have called out lawyers on briefs that they submitted that were apparently written by AI. And the most classic, it was a case here in Dallas in which the brief cited 4 cases that don't exist.
Yeah, hallucinations they call them.
And the judge ordered the opposing counsel to produce copies of those cases. Well, they don't exist, and so I think that's one. Is look, AI is not. I mean, it's not.
It's not perfect.
It's not. No, it makes mistakes. It makes a lot of mistakes. The other thing that I think a lot of people don't realize, and we're dealing. I mean, at First Liberty, we're dealing with this. I mean, because one way we want to use the tools to gain as much advantage as we can over our opponents, but at the same time, you have to realize when you use an AI program and you don't know that much about the program, and you put information and you provide information, that information, whatever you provide, you're sharing it outside.
Yes.
And AI uses that to build on for others. And so in the legal profession, if you share client confidences, you share proprietary information or confidential information, and you don't know, it's just going out there. And so, the lawyer says, I mean, be very, very careful about that. Quick story. We're actually interviewing someone, and I think we're going to hire the person, so I should start there. Very nice young man for one of our IT positions. And I asked him about, what and he's a recent college graduate. I said, what do you know about AI? And he said, well, I prepared for this interview using AI. And I said, well, what do you mean you prepared for the interview? He said, well, I asked AI to ask, what questions you would ask me. And I said, well, what questions would Jeff Mateer ask? Have I asked you those questions? and what's the best question? But I think it is to a certainly younger than us, Kerby.
That's right.
Perhaps even younger than you, Liberty. I mean, they are living in the AI world, and they see it as a tool to make themselves better. My concern is, I think we have to be concerned about what information we're sharing, where that information is going out, and then the other things this article points out, I think absolutely true. Are we, or we're not going to have critical thought anymore?
Yeah.
Are we just going to rely on, these lawyers? I mean, I use that example of that lawyer. You write a brief. I guess you're so strapped for time, you don't check what the brief says. There's no thinking, no thinking at all.
Yeah.
Well, this one goes into, by the third page, some things which, again, you can put in your next Know Why podcast. That, the old argument was, well, if we give kids calculators doing math, then eventually they won't learn their multiplication tables and things like that. But it says AI is a lot more than punching numbers into an equation. That in some cases, as we point out, it's cranking out images that are false, black Nazis and things like that, and of course hallucinations and all that. But as you point out, it can and is replacing critical thought. And you wonder what kind of nonsense is getting fed in. If there's one thing I do remember from the days in which I programmed computers, that's how I put myself through graduate school, garbage in, garbage out. And so that's another issue. And if nothing else, back to the issue of writing, you and I, we write. And I don't think that when this pops up and say, oh, can you write that for me? No, I don't want you to write it for me. I know you'll mess it up, and or you'll take it in a direction. Now, every once in a while, it still bugs me and says, well, can we rewrite that? And I'm going, well, okay. And I let do one sentence. I said, well, you moved some nouns and verbs, but I don't think you really improved it any much. But that's the world that we're going to find more and more. And I have a book on my shelf, and I did a commentary recently where the entire introduction to the book on AI was written by AI, just to show how very coherent and informative it is. So once again, we have to figure out what the benefits and the drawbacks are of artificial intelligence. So you need to be listening to the podcast.
Yeah, one of the people I interviewed, she's actually going to be on Point of View with me next week when I guest host, on Emily Harrison. And she talks about how young kids have been raised on screens and with the internet. And so that line with now AI and things like ChatGPT, it really is blurred. And so I'm glad that so many people are talking about it, because I don't think it's something that's completely scary that we have to stay away from. I think there are legitimate uses, but really thinking critically now, while we still have the capability to discern what are appropriate uses and what are not, and especially equipping the next generation to think through those questions too.
Let me again just mention the booklet that we produced 2 years ago. I think we'll do a new one, and we'll probably borrow a lot from the Know Why podcast, but it's got about 3 pages there about just kind of a biblical perspective on how to think about that, then point you to various articles that we have seen from a number of individuals like John Stonestreet. I even give one quote from Bill Gates and Jim Dennison and some others. And again, that's a resource. Of course, the podcast is one as well. But as we go to a break, let me just mention we'll have Penna Dexter's commentary and then maybe some final comments about what's going on in the world of baseball. All that coming up right after this.
Amidst a push to bring manufacturing back to our shores, many communities are bringing shop classes back to their high schools. According to the Wall Street Journal, as baby boomers retire, companies are looking for workers in the skilled trades, but there simply aren't enough young adults trained in plumbing, electrical work, and welding. Some businesses are beginning to look at high school students, and not just as future hires. Some companies want them now, or at least soon. School districts are getting on board by resuscitating the shop class and giving manufacturers tables at their job fairs. In some cases, businesses are teaming up with high schools to enable students to work part-time, earning money as well as academic credit. Employers told the Journal this is a strategy that is likely to become more crucial in the coming years. Most industries are tech-infused and seek younger workers who are comfortable programming and running computer diagnostics. They need tech-savvy workers to run advanced equipment. According to the Journal's report, the smartest employers get a foot into high schools early. They're attracting high school students by running summer camps to expose them to careers in the trades. They're offering internships and shadowing opportunities at workplaces and are sometimes even dropping by to meet students at school and see them in action. One welding instructor told the Journal employers regularly visit his classroom, bringing branded swag and offering students jobs when they graduate. For many reasons, college is no longer a given, even for the smart kids. In fact, smart kids everywhere are rejecting the colleges for all mindset. Smart parents are considering the cost, especially when their students don't have career goals that require college degrees. They're advising caution about student debt. Some smart kids are foregoing the student debt for financial freedom by starting well-paid, skilled trade jobs right out of high school. Shop class isn't for everyone, but neither is college. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, and let me just one more time welcome those of you listening from the life-changing radio network stations covering most of New England, Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island. We're certainly glad that you can join us. And for those of you listening on computer, you probably heard the commentary by Penna Dexter. We always play it at the quarter to the top of the hour. It's entitled Shop Class Returns. But even if you did not hear it, you can, of course, find it on the website, pointofview.net. My commentary today is about the housing crisis, and that's one we've talked about before. But I thought it would be good to get into this for just a moment. One, because Liberty, we were just talking about the fact that one of the most recent issues of Outlook is about the workforce. And we have so many million young men that are not working, not looking for work. if we're going to bring jobs back to the United States, and I think that's a real possibility, we better make sure that we understand the importance of these jobs. And if nothing else, one of the things I noticed when Penn and Dexter's commentary came out is, Jeff, you said, it brings back fond memories, because you and I both had shop classes,
We had
right?
shop class, and it was something that I did not excel at. I think I didn't say fond memories. I said memories.
Memories, okay.
I did not say
Okay.
fond.
Well,
it brought
I made a few things that were okay.
Yeah, but I'm not even sure I did. But that is true. And I mean, she's spot on this, and this is something. We've done a disservice to say sort of this expectation that everyone who graduates from high school should go to college. I mean, that's sort of been the mantra the last 30, 40 years. And anyone who has the ability and wants to pursue, I mean, they should go to college, but not to the exclusion of some very valuable trades. And we all know that. I mean, the plumbers, the electricians. I have a brother-in-law who went to college, has an electrical engineering degree, and he's an electrician because he actually can make more money being an electrician.
I believe it.
Using his hands and his brain than if he were just sitting in some office somewhere. And so very, very important that we begin to really promote. And I think in our Christian communities, not everyone has to go to college, and we shouldn't look down on people who don't go to college. Being a welder, being an electrician, being a plumber is an honorable profession, and quite frankly, much needed.
Yes. And I might just mention, I've said this before, my first job was in a machine shop, so I was around people that were welders. And Mike Rowe, of course, we have his picture on my commentary that came out on Monday from Dirty Jobs. He oftentimes talks with individuals. And back to the issue, this isn't a male or female issue, because one of the welders that he has talked about making six-figure income is a woman who's a welder. So whether you're working in a machine shop, whether you're working in manufacturing, as a matter of fact, more and more of the manufacturing is going to probably be done by robots, but you'll need to know how to do computer programming. You know how to actually fix machines and things like that. That's why I think this return of shop classes is a really good idea. And I think whether you're a male or a female, a boy or a girl, you should be able to take a shop class.
Oh, absolutely. You know, one of my best friends from growing up that I'm still close with, she has moved to an office job now, but for years she engineered airplanes. And, that was a great career for her. So this is something that I think the younger generations are welcoming, because there is so much debt associated with college, so much stress. And we are also seeing a trend of Gen Zers kind of moving away from the big metropolitan areas and actually kind of becoming rooted in smaller towns again. This is all a really great movement, I think. And they're realizing that they can lead fulfilling lives. You're also going to start seeing earlier marriages and children if younger adults are able to actually get a job where they can support a family right off the bat and not be, burdened with debt. And I think they're starting to think about that. So I think this is really positive.
Yeah. Well, again, that is a commentary. And again, we've mentioned that if you haven't already done so, there's a place where you can subscribe to the Viewpoints commentary. Mine will arrive in your inbox Monday through Friday, Penn and Dexter's. The one on shop class returns. If you sign up, you'll see it tomorrow in the inbox on Saturday. But I did want to leave a little bit of time. If you've listened to the program at all, you know that Jeff Mateer and certainly Steve Miller and myself, we like baseball. And of course, this is a guy that actually goes out to spring training. And you asked if we were going to maybe talk about Pete Rose. So let's get into it.
So I think it's interesting. The commissioner of baseball, not Kelly Shackelford, the commissioner,
the other commissioner,
the commissioner of baseball, this week in response to a request has taken off, and I want to get the right term. It was the term is it's the permanently ineligible list that Commissioner Rob Manfred has removed Pete Rose, Shoeless Joe Jackson, and a host of other deceased players who had been on this list, which says you were ineligible for the Hall of Fame. and he has removed them. And basically the rationale being the reason they're removed from the list is they're dead. And so they can't hurt the integrity of the game anymore through their actions. The article, there's an article in National Review by Dan McLaughlin, who makes the point that Pete Rose should go into the Hall of Fame. Shoeless Joe should not. And despite the movie about Shoeless Joe, but the point being, Shoeless Joe actually received money and at least participated in a conspiracy to throw the World Series for the Chicago White Sox in, I believe, 1919, where Pete Rose, of course, has been banned because he was gambling, but never bet against his own team. He bet for his team and bet for other teams. And the point that many people have made, including our great producer Steve Miller has made, is that there's no one who competed and had a zeal for winning than Pete Rose. Pete Rose did not want to lose. And so I think it's interesting. And so on the one hand, I do agree with that, but I would say why now? And one is Donald Trump has been lobbying on behalf of the Rose family. So you've got, of course, Trump's involved. Donald Trump's involved in everything. Of course, Trump's involved. Of course. On behalf of the Rose family. But I do think it is. And I go to, we're at a point where, does character really matter? We're just going to look at results on the ball field. Yeah. And so that, I have a little trouble with that because I think character does matter. But as my father reminded me, if character if we were going to go by character in the Baseball Hall of Fame, there'll be a lot of people out who are in now. So let's stand on their. Pete Rose did not use performance enhancing drugs. He did not bet against his team. He didn't throw games. He's the all-time hit leader, the all-time games played leader. It's time to put Pete Rose into the Hall of Fame. Again, the only argument against it is you don't want to reward bad behavior, but that's not what we're doing. I think we're recognizing, and you and I have both been to Cooperstown. It's been a while since we've both been there, and it's worth going back there again because they've got some new exhibits. But Baseball Hall of Fame, worth a thought. And again, always one of those troubling ethical issues, but I thought we'd cover that as well. First of all, let me just say that tomorrow, those of you that signed up for our trip to Greece will be with us, and we'll be heading off for a trip. So first of all, Liberty, you're going to be doing the program for 2 separate occasions. Penedextra will be doing it for 2 occasions, as well as Dr. Merrill Matthews. So 2, and 2, and then I'll be back. And so again, looking forward to that opportunity. Looking forward to meeting some of you face-to-face there in Greece as we follow the footsteps of Paul and John, going even to Patmos and Ephesus. I want to thank Megan for help engineering the program. Steve, thank you for your baseball advice and for producing the program. And we look forward to seeing you back here on Monday right here on Point of View.
Have you subscribed to the Viewpoints commentary? No? Well, you're missing out on an essential free resource straight from Point of View's Kerby Anderson. Viewpoints are Kerby's free daily email commentaries covering any and every issue relevant to your faith, your family, and your freedom. And what makes Viewpoints essential is how packed they are with information you will not get anywhere else, while also being a quick read. In 2 minutes or less, you can become better educated about an important issue affecting America. And Viewpoints is easily shareable, making it a great resource to forward to your friends or also to post on social media. Don't miss out on this essential free resource from Kerby Anderson and Point of View. Join the thousands of Americans who receive Viewpoints by enrolling today. Do it right now at pointofview.net/enroll. Again, it's free and it takes just a moment. pointofview.net/enroll. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.